Could, should, and will Kris Knoblauch be the next head coach of the New York Rangers? We debate that. Plus, going to be talking about the Hartford Wolf Pack losing Game 1 of their best-of-5 series against the Hershey Bears in overtime by a final score of 3-2. All this and much, much more on today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers. Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 826 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And figure we can just dive right into it here. In our most recent episode, we talked about a couple of the different candidates to become the next head coach of the New York Rangers. We covered Peter Laviolette, also covered Mark Messier, the two individuals who I think might be the most likely, and then also the biggest dark horse, respectively. Obviously, Messier being the dark horse, Laviolette being seemingly one of the early favorites, and somebody that I think could make at least some sense. But with that, we now turn our attention to kind of a Hartford Wolf Pack themed episode here. I figured we're going to be talking about the Pack and their disappointing 3-2 overtime loss against the Bears last night, so we'll get to that. But I also wanted to talk about the current head coach of the Hartford Wolf Pack, who at least has something of a chance to become the next head coach of the New York Rangers, and I am, of course, talking about Kris Knoblauch. And from what I can gather, just kind of browsing social media and what have you, it seems like a good amount of Ranger fans are kind of on board with this idea. Some fans have him at the top of the list. Some fans seem to, prefer somebody like Kris Knoblauch as opposed to one of the retread options, whether that's Claude Julien, Bruce Boudreau, Mike Babcock even, seem to prefer, going in a different direction, going a little bit against the grain and, not just picking somebody off of the NHL coaching carousel that we see every offseason where, all these coaches just kind of cycle from one team to the next. But when you consider that Knoblauch does seem to be a Chris Drury guy. And, granted, he was hired during the Gorton JD era, but he seems to be a Chris Drury guy. You also consider the fact that the Hartford Wolf Pack, rough loss last night, but they're still making a decent run here in the Calder Cup playoffs. And overall, the team seems to be pretty happy with how Knoblauch has done with the Wolf Pack. He's also won at other stops in his career, so it's not too hard to see why he's beginning to emerge, at least as something of a candidate to once again take over as the next head coach of the New York Rangers. And I figure with that, we might as well just kind of go through Knoblauch's track record. For starters, what's kind of interesting to me is he is just 44 years old right now. And by my count, it looks like he started his coaching tenure about 12 years ago, first time as a head coach. So he's only 32 when he got his first head coaching gig. That was in, once again, the 2010-2011 season as the head coach of the Kootenay Ice of the WHL. He was there for just 2 seasons, but in his first season with the Ice, they went 46-21-5, and they won it all in his first season as a head coach. They won what's known as the Ed Chinaworth Cup. That goes to the WHL champion every season. And then to follow it up, his second season, the Ice actually lost in the first round of the playoffs after going 36-26-10. So not quite as good in his second year, but he immediately moves on from the Ice to the Erie Otters of the OHL, ends up spending 5 seasons with them. In order, they missed the playoffs in his first year there, but he didn't take over until about midway through the season, so I don't think we can really count that against him. The season after that, his first full season with the Otters, they lose in the third round of the playoffs. The season after that, they lose in the J. Ross Robertson Cup Finals. Second straight episode where we're mentioning the J. Ross Robertson Cup, so that's kind of interesting there. You do 826 episodes, sooner or later you get a chance to talk about just about everything. But yeah, they lose in the finals in his third year. His fourth year, they lose once again in the third round, and then in his fifth and final year with the Otters, Knoblauch leads them to a record of 50-15-3, and they win the J. Ross Robertson Cup. So in his 4 full seasons with Erie, and again, we're not counting the first season where he took over about midway through, but Knoblauch, his worst season there, as far as, regular season record is concerned, was actually his final season when they ended up winning the league championship. And again, that record was 50-15-3, 103 points, and that was his worst season of the 4 seasons that he spent with the Erie Otters. So he obviously had a very successful tenure there, and caps it off with an exclamation point, league championship. And then after that, ends up being an assistant coach for the Philadelphia Flyers in 2017-2018, as well as 2018-2019. And then finally, that brings us to his current position, which is with the Hartford Wolf Pack. His first season there was in 2019-2020. Pack go 31, 20, and 11 in his first season there. And then, of course, the season was canceled due to COVID. Then in 2020, 2021, the Wolfpack go 14, 9, and 1. There were no playoffs that year, once again, due to COVID. The Pacific Division of the AHL had their own little tournament that year, but obviously Hartford was not part of it. Certain teams participated in the season that year, other teams did not, and as a result of that, that season, Hartford only had two opponents the entire season. That would be the Bridgeport Islanders and the Providence Bruins. Obviously, they were trying to cut down on travel, which is what the NHL did that season as well. But just a bizarre season. Pack went 14, 9, and 1 that year. And then, of course, last year, they go 32, 32, and 8. They missed the playoffs. This year, 35, 26, and 11. So not a stellar regular season record, but they are having a nice run for themselves in the playoffs so far. They've advanced through the first two rounds, and now they're in round 3 or the round of 8, however you want to look at it. And they did lose last night in game 1 in overtime against the Hershey Bears. But Knoblauch, for his coaching career with the Hartford Wolf Pack, not counting the playoff games this year, currently stands at 112, 87, and 31. So, if you combine the losses and the overtime losses and the shootout losses and every kind of loss that you can have, it'd be 112 and 118. So it's not a stellar, sparkling record, but I do think the Rangers have been mostly happy with what they've gotten from Knoblauch there. And when you consider, everything he did before then, and I realize the competition isn't quite as high, but, he's in other leagues, the WHL, the OHL, tons of success there. And again, I do think he's pretty highly thought of within the Ranger organization. If they want to go against the grain a little bit and kind of buck this trend that pretty much every team in the NHL seems to have, going back to the NHL coaching carousel, and these guys just bounce from one team to the next, from one season to the next. Knoblauch certainly is a candidate and somebody that's intriguing and somebody that, again, would kind of just go against the grain a little bit, go with a little bit of a bold hire, and somebody that has not been a head coach at the NHL level. But it's something that I'm certainly open to, and we'll see what happens. I think when we're all said and done at the end of this, once I've talked about every single individual that I can possibly come up with who could be at least something of a likely candidate to be the next head coach of the New York Rangers, I think maybe at the end I'll rank them. I'm hoping I have time to do that. I think I will because, I can't imagine the Rangers are about to hire a head coach later today or tomorrow. I haven't even heard anything about them doing any interviews. It's possible they're waiting for the playoff run to end and, you see who's available and what might happen there. I know some Ranger fans are talking about Mike Sullivan, but I can't see that happening. First of all, I can't see him even being fired by the Penguins. I know, obviously, they had a rough year this year and missed the playoffs and had that really bad performance late in the season against the Blackhawks where they pretty much gave away their playoff spot. So that was pretty funny. But, I can't see Mike Sullivan leaving the Penguins to end up with the Rangers. If he ends up parting ways with the Penguins, then I'll talk about him in greater detail. For the time being, while he's still gainfully employed by the Penguins, it doesn't even really make sense to talk about him. I know some fans are talking themselves into it. To me, it remains a very unlikely scenario. But I do want to keep the focus on Kris Knoblauch here, and we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. There's some interesting dots that we can connect that lead you to believe that Kris Knoblauch, right now, could be one of the favorites. I don't know. Like I said in the other episode, Peter Laviolette, to me, just kind of a gut feeling that he might be in the lead right now as far as most likely person to be the next head coach of the New York Rangers. But I do think Knoblauch is going to be given some serious consideration at the very least. And would it shock me if he's the next head coach of the New York Rangers? No, not in the slightest. But I do want to keep everything rolling in just a second here. I want to continue talking about Knoblauch and his credentials and some interesting dots that might lead you to believe that he could end up being the next head coach of the New York Rangers. Also want to get to the Hartford Wolf Pack and their Game 1 overtime loss against the Hershey Bears. Just kind of talk about, some of the bigger talking points and which players stood out in that game. And we're going to get to all that good stuff in just a second here. But first, gotta let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So, the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to my garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, and exclusions apply. All right, we just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And for the everydayers, definitely stick around. Going into next week, this is the last episode for this week, but we're going to talk about whatever happens in Game 2 between Hartford and Hershey. That'll be happening on Saturday night. And we're also going to continue our head coaching search here. We're going to talk about names such as, maybe Claude Julien, Bruce Boudreau. We'll see who else we can discuss. But, yeah, we're going to leave no stone unturned as far as potential next head coach of the New York Rangers. And that's going to be a heavy focus going forward. Also going to talk about some of the more out there, I shouldn't really say out there, but they seem to be ideas that I don't think are going to come to fruition. There's talk about Alexi Lafreniere or Capo Caco being cap casualties, and I just don't see that, but I suppose crazier things have happened, and we'll definitely dive into that topic in a future episode as well. But for the time being here, let's keep the spotlight pointed firmly at Kris Knoblauch here. And I mentioned a second ago that there are some interesting dots that can be connected and can make you believe that Knoblauch very well could be the next head coach of the New York Rangers. So to take it from the top here, obviously we know Gerard Gallant no longer the head coach of the New York Rangers. And two of his assistant coaches, Mike Kelly and Jim Midgley, they are no longer with the team either. And that's usually pretty standard. When a head coach gets canned, usually the entire staff goes right along with him. There are obviously exceptions to this rule. And I think one that probably popped into everybody's head as soon as I said that is, of course, Benoit Allaire. He is still here as the goalie coach. Benoit Allaire is eternal. He's been the Ranger goalie coach since Tom Rennie was here. So he's now been with 5 different head coaches of the New York Rangers. And it's soon going to be 6 because, like I said, he was retained and it doesn't seem like he's going anywhere. And for sure, one of the absolute best goalie coaches in the league. Obviously, Henrik Lundqvist and Igor Shesterkin definitely spring to mind first. But, you can look at guys like Georgiev, Antti Ranta, Yaroslav Halak this year, Cam Talbot. All these guys have had, a decent amount of success with the Rangers, and in some cases, even after they've left the Rangers and gone somewhere else and had decent careers for themselves. So, yeah, Benoit Allaire, no reason whatsoever to try to upgrade from him. I don't think an upgrade of Benoit Allaire exists anywhere on planet Earth. But the other interesting thing, in addition to Benoit Allaire, the other coach that's still here, at least as of now, is Gord Murphy. And the reason why this is interesting is because Murphy was actually Knoblauch's assistant coach in Hartford with the Wolf Pack before he joined the Rangers. So if I'm Murphy, I am definitely pulling for Kris Knoblauch to get this job because you got to believe if Knoblauch gets the job, him and Murphy are close. The two of them were actually assistant coaches, together with the Philadelphia Flyers at the same time. So they know each other pretty well. They coach in Philly together. They coach in Hartford together. And again, if I'm Murphy, I want Knoblauch to get the job because if Knoblauch gets the job and he's the new head coach, and I'm Murphy, then I've got some job security. I can't imagine that Knoblauch would get the job and then, turn him away. And whereas if somebody else gets the job, if the Rangers go with, Laviolette, Boudreau, it could really be anybody. Then obviously at that point, I think Murphy's job becomes very much up in the air. For the most part, head coaches are given free reign to bring in whoever they want as far as assistant coaches are concerned. And you would have to think that whoever becomes the next head coach of the Rangers, they'll be granted, that same freedom. But for the time being, like I said, Murphy is still here. And if Knoblauch ends up being the head coach, he's got his guy in place and he can go about filling out the rest of his coaching staff. But when I saw Murphy was still here and that Knoblauch and him have some history together, my eyebrows definitely went up and it's kind of like, okay, maybe Knoblauch could be the next guy. And I don't know how that would work. Obviously Hartford's in the playoffs right now. Could the Rangers interview Knoblauch in the middle of this playoff run? Obviously, they already know him pretty well. I don't know if you have to do extensive interviewing with Knoblauch the same way that you would with another coach, an unknown. Obviously, if they didn't like Knoblauch and they didn't think that he was a good coach, then they wouldn't have him coaching their AHL team. But yeah, I guess it's at least possible. Maybe Knoblauch, in a hypothetical scenario here, Knoblauch could become the next head coach of the Rangers in the coming days or weeks here. And if Hartford's still in the playoffs, he can close out his run with them before, going to the Rangers. I don't know. We'll see how the whole thing shakes out here, and probably getting a little bit ahead of myself. I'm sure the Rangers are going to do their due diligence, looking at different head coaching options. But I think for sure Knoblauch is one of them. And like I said, the fact that Gordon Murphy is still here, I think that's a little hint that Knoblauch is certainly going to be firmly in consideration and maybe one of the favorites to be the next head coach of the New York Rangers. I should also mention that Kris Knoblauch, as a lot of you guys probably remember, this would not be his first time manning the bench of the New York Rangers. Back in 2021, he had a brief 6-game stint as the head coach of the Rangers. In a nutshell, what happened was David Quinn and his entire coaching staff were placed into the COVID protocol, and so none of them were available. You had Knoblauch, he was the head coach. Chris Drury was like the acting assistant coach. He was on the bench there too. But while Knoblauch was there, very small sample size, obviously, but the Rangers did win 4 of the 6 games that he coached. And technically, he doesn't get credit for those wins because he wasn't the interim coach. He was labeled as like the substitute coach because, David Quinn was still in position. He was going to come back and be the head coach, as soon as he was cleared by the league. So he doesn't get credit, does Knoblauch, for those 4 games that he won, which is unfortunate, but he won those 4 games. We all saw it with our 2 eyes, and the Rangers seemed to play well while he was there. Again, very small sample size. I wouldn't read too much into it. But also of note, his first game behind the Ranger bench was the game where the Rangers just squeaked by the Philadelphia Flyers by a final score of 9-0. They were actually up 9-0 after the second period of that game and pretty much took their foot off the gas down the stretch there. But that was a heck of a debut for Knoblauch. And I got to say, looking at Knoblauch's credentials and the fact that he's won a couple of championships in some other leagues, I like that. And I would say I'd probably prefer Knoblauch over some of the retread options that we're hearing out there. Bruce Boudreau, not really that all in on him as the next head coach of the Rangers. Same thing for, Babcock, Julian. I mean, you can make a case. Both of them are championship coaches, too, at the NHL level. But I don't know. I feel like I'd rather go with Knoblauch, who's been in-house, obviously knows some of these Ranger players, and seems to be very highly thought of within the Ranger organization. And I just get the feeling the Rangers would play hard for him, but we'll see. Obviously, there's a long way to go here. We're going to talk about some other coaching candidates. And like I said, I am looking forward to doing an episode in the future where we basically just, once we're done talking about all these coaches individually and we give them all a fair trial and, talk about their credentials as far as being the next head coach of the Rangers, I'd like to do a final episode here, hopefully right before the Rangers make their decision, where I kind of just rank everybody from, least interested on my part to most interested as far as, who could be the next head coach of this team. But that's a different topic for a different day. And for the time being, right now, we're going to turn our attention to the Hartford Wolf Pack. Like I said, they are in the round of 8, the 3rd round of the AHL playoffs, however you want to talk about it, or however you want to, label it. And we're going to do that in just a second. All right, so Hartford Wolf Pack, they lose Game 1 to the Hershey Bears last night, Thursday night, by a final score of 3-2. About 4 minutes into the overtime period, they actually led 2-0 into this game, did the Wolfpack going into the 3rd period. So for that reason alone, a little bit of a disappointing loss for the Pack. I did want to mention there was a really scary, just strange moment early in this game, getting late into the 1st period there. Anton Bleed, who I discussed in a recent episode, we were looking at who was doing what for the Hartford Wolfpack thus far in the playoffs, and obviously with the Rangers being out, we're going to shine more of a spotlight at the Pack and talk about them more often as they go deeper and deeper into this playoff tournament. But there was a skirmish at the end of a play, the whistle had blown, and you had a camera shot of Anton Bleed kind of doubled over and going toward the Wolfpack bench. And I didn't really think much of it. I thought, maybe got the wind knocked out of him. Maybe it looked like almost like he was holding his wrist. So, I mean, it didn't really look that bad. I mean, that's the bottom line. But you never know about this stuff for sure. And then all of a sudden, the camera shot is actually on the Hershey Bears, and some of their players start to react to something. And 1 or 2 of them were, doing the waving the medical people over to an area. And arena gets really quiet. They bring the stretcher out. Both teams go to the locker room early. There was about 2:39 to go in the 1st period. And what they ended up doing was after the intermission here, they went back out there. They played the final 2:39 of the 1st period, took a 1-minute break, and then switched sides and played the 2nd period in its entirety. But, we finally got a replay here. And they said that there was a player who was pinched along the boards, and I thought Hartford's announcer did a great job here. He didn't want to speculate. They weren't even 100% sure that it was Anton Bleed. They don't have all the camera shots and camera angles that obviously MSG and the Rangers do. But yeah, just very strange. They said that it was a non-life-threatening upper body injury, and that, the reaction that we saw there was the result of an abundance of caution. Both the Wolfpack trainers as well as the Hershey Bear trainers, they were over there. Emergency medical personnel apparently were all over as well. And, those people just do such an amazing job. There's been instances in the past where, I know they said, I believe it was Jay Bomeister, a few years ago, where, he had an issue on the bench. He basically just collapsed. And, the medical team just sprang into action right away and revived him. And I think it's been said, I'm almost positive, and, if I'll look this up to be sure, but, they were pretty much credited with saving his life. And I don't think this ever got that serious, but it's hard not to have that idea, that those scenarios pop into your head where we've seen players, collapse on the bench kind of out of nowhere. And again, I'm not even sure we ever really got any resolution as to what actually happened here. It was just a very strange situation, but it couldn't have been that bad because I don't think Anton Bleed missed a shift in the second period. They went back out there. He was even getting into it in a skirmish a little bit later in this game. So hockey players, man, they're a rare breed, and obviously, an abundance of toughness there. We talked about the abundance of caution, an abundance of toughness on the part of Anton Bleed getting back into this game. And obviously, you got to believe that there was no risk of anything worse happening. Otherwise, they never would let him get anywhere near back this game. Sometimes you gotta save these guys from themselves. But yeah, I mean, overall, you would have never known that anything was wrong with him watching the rest of this game. But just a scary, just kind of freaky moment there. And obviously, first and foremost, before we talk about anything else about this game, just very happy that Anton Bleed is okay and seems to be good to go for the rest of this series. Something else that I want to mention here, as far as a player on the Hershey Bears, you'll never guess in a million years, I mean, unless you just happen to know this, you'll never guess who is the captain for the Hershey Bears. I'll give you a second to think about it. He does have ties to the New York Rangers. That's a hint. He was a former first-round pick by the New York Rangers. That's another hint. I don't think anyone's going to come up with this unless you watched the game last night or unless you're already aware of the fact, before I mentioned it here. The captain of the Hershey Bears is Dylan McElrath. He was actually pretty noticeable in this game, played very well, was the captain. And as I mentioned, he was a first-round pick by the Rangers in, I want to say, 2010. And it just never really worked out. He's bounced between the NHL and the AHL with a couple of different teams ever since then. More time in the AHL than the NHL. They mentioned that he played 6 games in the NHL with the Caps this season, but that was, his first NHL action since 2019. But yes, Dylan McElrath still bouncing around the league. And like I said, played well in this game, still a physical player. So yeah, just kind of a fun fact there for everybody that's wondering, is Dylan McElrath is now the captain of the Hershey Bears. I also wanted to talk a little bit about Dylan Garand here. I thought he was outstanding in this game. Ends up stopping 32 of 35 shots, and as we documented in our most recent episode, he's been outstanding. Former 4th-round pick by the New York Rangers, still only 20 years old, but he's been great in the playoffs. Had a goals against average of like 1.17 coming into this one. That's obviously risen a little bit here, but he was really under fire in the first period of this game. The Pack got outshot 17-3 in the first period, and he didn't let any of those shots get by him. And really, the goals that got by him, not really on him, certainly not soft goals, a couple of deflections, and the overtime winner was the result of a 2-on-1. Guy took a shot from point-blank range. Garand had made an excellent save just before that on a 4-on-2 to keep the Pack alive in the overtime period. And like I said, it's going to be very, very interesting to see when he might end up making his NHL debut with the New York Rangers. Obviously, Yaroslav Halak is a free agent. We'll see if he's back. Louis Domingue is the backup to Garand with the Hartford Wolf Pack. So it could come down to, maybe they go with Domingue, do the Rangers at the start of next season. Maybe they bring in another veteran backup goalie at a small price, or maybe Yaroslav Halak is back on another 1-year deal. But Garand, I would say he's a little bit of a long shot to make the Rangers, being so young, and they probably want him to get a little bit more seasoning. But never say never. We've seen the Rangers kind of throw some young players into the fire. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But Dylan Garand doing nothing but helping his stock with what he's done thus far in the Calder Cup playoffs here. I also wanted to talk a little bit about Larry Pahuniemi. As we mentioned, there was a report that surfaced that he will be leaving the Ranger organization following the Hartford Wolf Pack's run in the AHL playoffs, this season here. Former 5th-round pick by the Rangers, but crazy first period. He was called for a trip fairly early in the first period, and it kind of looked like the player dove, and Pahuniemi was just livid after this. He was going to be, escorted to the penalty box. The refs eventually got together and took away the penalty, and they said no penalty on the play. But Lauri Pahuniemi, and I'm not the only person that noticed this, the announcer seemed to notice this as well. It looked like he flipped somebody off. There's no other way to say it here. Like, he was being escorted by, I think, one of the linesmen actually toward the penalty box. And like I said, he was livid. He was yelling at somebody. I don't know if it was the player that on the Bears that maybe he thought dove. Maybe he was yelling at the referee. But his hand went up in the air and a finger went up. and I'm not going to reenact it here on YouTube, but his hand was turned this way, and that's, the prime position when somebody's giving the bird, that's what they do, so that's what it looked like to me. Maybe that's not what it was, or maybe the refs didn't see it, or maybe they let it slide or something. But, the Hartford Wolfpack announcer was also mentioning that it looked like he might have done an obscene gesture, and I think we all know what that gesture is. So I don't know, man. Like, maybe he was just sticking his hand up. Maybe it was like the waving thing, like you're telling a player to come and get him. I don't know, but from what I saw, it looked like it was classic middle finger situation there. But regardless, he didn't get the penalty for either the trip or what may or may not have been an obscene gesture. But Pahuniemi, later in the first period, ended up scoring a goal while Hartford was on the power play. He had Zach Jones, that is, leading Tim Gettinger up the left side. Shot by Gettinger from kind of a tough angle, and Pahuniemi is there to bury the rebound, puts Hartford up 1-0, despite the fact, once again, that Hartford was outshot 17-3 in the first period. Somebody else that really stood out for me in this game was Bobby Trivigno. He's 24 years old, undrafted, was a standout player at UMass. He's now in his second season with the Hartford Wolf Pack. And the big knock on him is not really something that he can control, but he is 5'8", 161 pounds. So somebody who's used to being, one of the smaller players, if not the smallest player on the ice. But man, this guy, he plays every shift like it's his last. And I think, watching the Rangers in the playoffs last year, this was really kind of a breath of fresh air. Somebody that was just consistently busting his tail on every single shift, because we didn't see enough of that at all from the Rangers in that 7-game series against the Devils. But there was one shift in particular where puck is shot down. It's going to be an icing against the Wolfpack. Trivigno just goes absolutely flying into the offensive zone, and he nullifies the icing. And in so doing, he's chasing the puck. His momentum carries him behind the net, and he took a big hit against the boards, obviously paying the price to nullify the icing there. But then the puck comes back out into the neutral zone. Same shift here, and Trivigno goes flying back in the other direction on his back check, and pokes the puck away from a player on the Bears, won the foot race to get to the puck, and was smart enough to poke it away back to one of the Ranger defensemen so that Hartford could maintain control of the puck. I will say about Trivigno, I don't know if he's ever going to play for the Rangers. You got to believe that a lot of other guys are probably ahead of him in the pecking order. We saw Will Cuylle play a couple games this season. I think the Rangers certainly have plans for him. You know that the Rangers have big plans for Brennan Othmann, so you figure he'll make his Ranger debut at some point next season. Jonny Brodzinski is somebody that they like to go to if they just need a fill-in for a handful of games, do the Rangers. Probably a couple other guys as well, but I will say if Trivigno ever makes it to the Rangers and he gets any kind of a run, other than just a game or two, I feel like he will instantly become a crowd favorite, because, it's one thing to talk about it and read all these scouting reports, but to watch the Wolfpack last night and actually see it in action, I mean, this guy, like I said, it looked like he was fired out of a cannon every single time he was on the ice, just busting it and just outworking pretty much everybody on the ice. Not an easy thing to do in a playoff game, mind you. Also had a massive hit in the third period in the corner. Really, really impressed there. And, again, I don't know if we'll see him with the Rangers, but the guy plays his heart out. And he's somebody that I'll definitely be rooting for if and when he does make his Ranger debut. The Ranger top line, left to right, was Cuylle, Carpenter, and Brodzinski. And Brodzinski really had a good night. He actually scored the Rangers' second goal that was also on the power play. Rangers did a great job, working the puck around, a lot of good passes. Brodzinski on 2 different occasions during this power play was able to get to the loose puck and keep the play alive for the Rangers, and then he finishes it off, gets a pass from Tanner Fritz. It was, I want to say, Cuylle passing to Fritz, and then Fritz across the ice to Brodzinski. Brodzinski's in the left faceoff circle. He winds back, lets it fly with a one-timer, and scores. And that put the Wolfpack up 2-0 at that point. But Brodzinski's out there on the Pack's top power play unit, on the Pack's top penalty kill unit, just all over the ice, and just seems to have a presence. And, watching him play in this game, you can see why he's been the Hartford Wolf Pack captain for the last couple of seasons here. And I think the Rangers really do like him as that NHL, AHL swingman, and that guy that can set a good example for their young players at the AHL, because he plays really hard, and he was a big-time standout in this game. Somebody else that stood out for me was Will Lockwood, just a hard-nosed player, or so it would seem, watching this game, just throwing his weight around all night. Couple of different open ice hits for Lockwood. He was a former third-round pick by the Canucks, played in 13 games with the Canucks this season, was then traded along with a 7th-round pick to the Rangers midway through this season in exchange for Vitaly Kravtsov. And while we're talking about Kravtsov, 16 games with the Canucks this year, 1 goal and 1 assist. So it didn't really go a whole lot better for him in Vancouver than it did with the Rangers. But Yeah, just unfortunate that the Rangers couldn't hold on. You know, they had the Rangers. I'm going to do that at least a couple of times talking about the Hartford Wolf Pack. Unfortunate that the Hartford Wolf Pack could not hold on. Like I said, they were up 2-0 going into the third period. They were up 2-1 with just over 2 minutes remaining. Hershey had actually pulled its goalie, but I don't think he ever even made it to the bench. There was a shot from the point, just a nasty deflection in front. Garand couldn't stop it. I don't know how many goalies are going to make a save on this. It was just a wicked deflection that went completely in the opposite direction into the top shelf. That tied the game. And then it goes into overtime. And for anybody wondering, AHL playoff overtime is the same as the NHL. You go 5-on-5. You know, it's sudden death. Whoever scores wins. You play all night if you have to. But as I mentioned a second ago, Garand with a couple of really nice saves on a 4-on-2. Stopped the initial shot, also got the rebound. But it couldn't have been more than like 30 seconds after this. You've got Hershey going back into the attacking zone on a 2-on-1. And no pass was made, but, you know, basically the skater was able to walk right up to the net, shoot from point-blank range, and score. And so Hershey, at 4:41 of overtime, gets the 3-2 win over Hartford. Hartford now trailing 1-0 in the best-of-5 series. And Game 2 is going to be Saturday night, also in Hershey, also at 7 p.m. Definitely looking forward to watching that game. Huge game. Obviously, just a world of difference between 1-1 and 2-0 in a best-of-5 series. And fingers crossed that Hartford can strike back here and find a way to get a win after what was a rough loss here in Game 1. Also of note, the World Championships are underway. Capo Kakko is playing for Team Finland, and somebody actually posted a video not too long ago on Twitter of him making some really nice moves with the puck and getting toward the net. Kind of lost control of the puck toward the end, but a couple of really nice moves, basically faked a couple of guys out of their skates. So we'll keep an eye on the World Championships as well. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. And definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, at @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that is at @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.